The dry summer heat shimmered across the Montana plains as Sarah Winters stood on the porch of her weathered cabin, bouncing little Emma on her hip, the child's golden curls catching the late afternoon sunlight. 5 years had passed since she'd last seen him, but something in the air felt different today, a familiar electricity that made her heart race like it had when she was just 18, waiting by the Silver Creek with wildflowers in her hair and dreams in her eyes. Sarah's gaze drifted to the horizon where a lone rider appeared, silhouetted against the setting sun. The familiar broad shoulders and confident posture atop that chestnut stallion made her breath catch. Even at this distance, she knew it was him Clayton Reed had returned to Silverwater Valley. "Mama, who that?" Emma asked, pointing a chubby finger toward the approaching rider. Sarah swallowed hard, her mouth suddenly dry. "Just a visitor, sweetheart," she whispered, though her racing heart knew better. Clayton was no visitor, he was the storm that had swept through her life, leaving both destruction and beauty in his wake. She stepped back into the shadows of the porch, instinctively tightening her grip on Emma. Part of her wanted to rush inside, bolt the door, and pretend she hadn't seen him. But Sarah Winters had never been one to hide, not even from the man who had broken her heart before riding away to chase outlaws and glory. Clayton slowed his horse as he approached the modest homestead. The years had been kind to him, his face more weathered, perhaps, but his shoulders broader and his jawline still sharp beneath the stubble of his beard. His eyes, those piercing blue eyes that had once looked at her with such tenderness, now widened as they took in the sight of her standing there with a child on her hip. "Sarah," he said, her name like a prayer on his lips. He removed his hat, revealing dark hair streaked with hints of sun-bleached gold. "I didn't know if you'd still be here." "Where else would I be?" she replied, striving for a casual tone though her heart hammered against her ribs. "This is my home." Clayton's eyes moved to Emma, who hid her face against her mother's shoulder. Something flickered across his features: surprise, confusion, perhaps even pain. "Your daughter?" he asked, his voice low. Sarah nodded, lifting her chin slightly. "This is Emma, she's 4. The mathematics of the situation hung in the air between them, unspoken but impossible to ignore. 4 years. He'd been gone 5. "She's beautiful," Clayton said softly. "Like her mother." The compliment washed over Sarah like a cool breeze, unwelcome yet soothing all the same. "What brings you back to Silverwater, Clayton? Last I heard, you were riding with the Rangers down in Texas." He dismounted with the fluid grace she remembered, his boots raising small clouds of dust as they hit the ground. "The Rangers are finished with me, or maybe I'm finished with them. Either way, I'm back." He paused, his eyes never leaving her face. "For good, if there's anything left for me here." The weight of his words settled between them like a physical presence. Sarah felt her resolve wavering under his gaze, the same gaze that had once convinced her to meet him every evening by the river, despite her father's disapproval. "There's a boarding house in town," she said finally. "Mrs. Patterson keeps clean rooms." Clayton nodded, though disappointment shadowed his face. "I remember." He hesitated, then added, "I went by the river first, our spot. Foolish, I suppose, thinking you might still wait there after all this time." Sarah's throat tightened. That riverbank had been their sanctuary, the place where they'd shared dreams, kisses, and promises under a canopy of cottonwood trees. The place where she'd waited night after night for weeks after he'd left, until her pride finally overcame her heartbreak. "I stopped waiting a long time ago, Clayton," she said quietly. Emma squirmed in her arms, suddenly interested in the stranger. "You have a horse," she observed, peering at Clayton from beneath long lashes. A smile touched his lips, transforming his face into the one Sarah remembered from summers past. "I sure do, little lady. His name is Rusty. Can I pet him?" Emma asked, suddenly shy but curious. Before Sarah could intervene, Clayton was leading the gentle stallion closer. "He's real friendly. Here, give him this." He produced an apple from his saddlebag and offered it to Emma. Sarah reluctantly set her daughter down, watching as Clayton helped the little girl hold her palm flat while Rusty's velvety muzzle delicately accepted the offering. Emma's delighted giggle pierced through the wall Sarah had carefully constructed around her heart. "Thank you," Sarah said formally when Emma ran back to hide behind her skirts. It's getting late. We should get inside. Clayton replaced his hat, nodding in understanding. I've kept you long enough, but Sarah. He paused, his expression earnest. I'd like to talk properly when you have time. She should say no. She should tell him there was nothing to discuss. Instead, she heard herself saying, Sunday after church, I'll be at the river. Old habits die hard, I suppose. A smile, hopeful, grateful, spread across his face. I'll be there. As she watched him ride away, Sarah felt the familiar ache of longing she'd thought long buried. Emma tugged at her skirt. Mama, I'm hungry, Sarah sighed, turning back toward the cabin. Let's get you fed, then. But her eyes strayed once more to Clayton's retreating figure, and she wondered if she was making the biggest mistake of her life by allowing him back into it. The cabin felt emptier than usual that night, despite Emma's cheerful chatter as Sarah prepared a simple supper of beans, cornbread, and the last of the salted pork. Clayton's unexpected return had stirred up memories. She tried hard to forget the tender way he'd touched her face, the promises whispered against her skin, the future they'd planned together. Emma sat at the rough-hewn table, swinging her legs as she pushed beans around her plate. Mama, why was that man looking at you funny? Sarah nearly dropped the pot she was washing. What do you mean funny? Like Papa used to look at Miss Louisa before they went to California, Emma said innocently. Sarah froze. Frank Winters had been a decent man who'd offered marriage when Sarah discovered she was carrying Emma a pregnancy that had shocked the town given that Sarah had no husband and Frank was twice her age. He'd given Emma his name and Sarah his protection, asking little in return except companionship. When he'd fallen for the young schoolteacher and asked Sarah for a divorce last year, she'd granted it without resentment. Their marriage had been one of convenience, not love. Mr. Reed is an old friend, Sarah explained carefully. I haven't seen him in a very long time. Is he staying for breakfast? Emma asked hopefully. Sarah smiled despite herself. No, sweetheart, he's staying in town. Later, after tucking Emma into the small bed they shared, Sarah sat by the window staring out at the star-filled sky. Clayton's return complicated everything. For 5 years, she'd built a life without him, first as Frank's wife, then as a widow running a small horse breeding operation on her own after Frank left for California with his new bride. She'd made peace with her solitude, finding strength in independence. Yet one look from those blue eyes had been enough to make her pulse quicken like a schoolgirl's. Worse, she'd agreed to meet him by the river, their river, as if the years between them could simply be washed away by the same waters that had witnessed their young love. Sunday couldn't come quickly enough, and simultaneously seemed to approach with terrifying speed. Sarah dressed with extra care that morning, selecting a blue calico dress that brought out the amber flecks in her hazel eyes. She arranged her chestnut hair in a simple but elegant knot at the nape of her neck, then immediately felt foolish for making such an effort. You look pretty, Mama, Emma declared as Sarah helped her into her Sunday best. Thank you, sweetheart. Sarah smiled, fastening the buttons on Emma's dress. Now remember, after church, you'll be spending the afternoon with Mrs. Jenkins while I attend to some business. Can I play with her kittens? If you're very gentle, yes. Church service passed in a blur. Sarah was acutely aware of Clayton sitting several pews behind her, his presence like a physical touch on the back of her neck. She noticed the sideways glances from other congregants. Silverwater had always thrived on gossip, and Clayton Reed's return was undoubtedly the most exciting news in months. After delivering Emma to the kindly widow who lived near the church, Sarah made her way toward Silver Creek, her heart thundering with each step. The path was achingly familiar. How many times had she sneaked out at dusk to meet Clayton here, breathless with anticipation? The river gurgled peacefully as it had for countless years, indifferent to human dramas played out along its banks. The old cottonwood still stood sentinel, its leaves rustling in the gentle breeze. Sarah paused at the sight of Clayton already waiting there, skipping stones across the water's surface as he had when they were younger. He turned at the sound of her approach, and for a moment, time collapsed. He wasn't the hardened ranger who'd ridden back into town, but the 19-year-old boy who'd first stolen her heart with his crooked smile and grand dreams. You came, he said simply. I said I would. Sarah remained standing while Clayton leaned against the tree trunk. What did you want to talk about? Clayton ran a hand through his hair, a nervous gesture she remembered well. Everything, nothing, he sighed. I wanted to explain why I left, why I couldn't write, why it took me so long to come back. Sarah folded her arms across her chest. 5 years is a long time for explanations, Clayton. I know. He picked up another stone, turning it over in his calloused hands. When I joined the Rangers, I thought it would be temporary, a year or two to make some money, enough to buy that land we talked about. He glanced up at her. But things got complicated. The work was dangerous. I didn't want to make promises I couldn't keep. So you made no promises at all, Sarah said quietly. Do you have any idea what it was like, waiting every day for a letter that never came, hearing secondhand about your exploits with the Rangers? People looking at me with pity because that poor Winters girl was still pining for a man who'd clearly forgotten her. Clayton flinched. I never forgot you, Sarah, not for a single day. Actions speak louder than words. I'm here now, he said, stepping closer. And I'm not leaving again. Not unless you tell me to go. Sarah took a step back, maintaining the distance between them. Why now? What changed? Clayton's expression darkened. I took a bullet near the border last winter. Spent 3 months recovering in a mission infirmary. Had a lot of time to think about my life and what matters. His eyes met hers. You're what matters, Sarah, always have been. The revelation struck her like a physical blow. You were shot, he nodded, unbuttoning his shirt just enough to reveal a puckered scar below his collarbone. Came within an inch of my heart. Sarah's fingers itched to touch the wound, to confirm he was truly alive and standing before her. Instead, she clasped her hands tightly together. I'm sorry that happened to you. I'm not, Clayton said firmly. It brought me home, home. The word hung between them, laden with meaning. Was Silverwater still his home? Was she? There's something I need to ask, Clayton said, his tone suddenly serious. Emma's father, Frank Winters, Sarah supplied quickly. We married shortly after I realized I was expecting. He was kind to me when others weren't. Relief flickered across Clayton's face. The storekeeper, he must be 20 years your senior. 18, Sarah corrected. And he's in California now with his new wife. We divorced last year. Clayton absorbed this information slowly. So you're alone now. You and Emma. We managed just fine, Sarah said defensively. I breed horses. Frank left the cabin and some land to us in the divorce settlement. You always did have a way with horses, Clayton said with a smile. Remember that wild Mustang I tried to break? You had him eating from your hand in 2 days. Despite herself, Sarah smiled at the memory. Thunder, he was beautiful. You were beautiful, Clayton said softly. Still are. The compliment warmed her cheeks. Clayton, I don't know what you expect from me. It's been 5 years. I'm not the same girl who waited by this river. I can see that. His eyes were gentle. You're stronger now, a mother, independent. He took a cautious step closer. But when I look at you, Sarah, I still see the girl who loved wildflowers in her hair and dreamed of running her own ranch someday. I still see the woman I never stopped loving. Sarah's heart betrayed her with its quickened pace. Love isn't enough, Clayton, not when it's one-sided, not when one person stays and the other leaves. Then let me prove it's not one-sided anymore, he pleaded. Let me show you I'm here to stay. How? The question escaped before she could stop it. Give me a chance. That's all I'm asking. He reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she allowed the contact. His fingers were warm and rough against hers. Let me court you properly the way I should have years ago. Sarah withdrew her hand gently. I have Emma to consider now. She's my priority. As she should be, Clayton agreed. I'd like to get to know her too, if you'll allow it. The sincerity in his voice was almost her undoing. I need time, Clayton. Time is something I have plenty of now. He smiled that crooked smile that had always been her weakness. I'll wait, Sarah, for as long as it takes. As they walked back toward town, maintaining a proper distance between them, Sarah felt a curious lightness in her chest. She wasn't ready to forgive him, not yet, but for the first time in years, she felt the stirring of possibility. The following weeks brought a gradual shift to Sarah's carefully ordered life. True to his word, Clayton approached his courtship with patient determination. He began with small gestures, fresh wildflowers left on her porch, offers to repair the sagging fence around her corral, gentle conversations that carefully avoided pressing for more than she was ready to give. Sarah maintained her guard, but Emma had no such reservations. The little girl was enchanted by Clayton and his stories of far-off places. When he brought her a carved wooden horse, painted chestnut brown like his own Rusty, Emma declared him the nicest man in the world. "Careful with those compliments," Sarah cautioned one evening as she brushed Emma's hair before bed. "Mr. Reed's head might get too big for his hat." Emma giggled. "He said he's going to teach me to ride a real horse, not just the ponies. Can he, Mama, please?" Sarah hesitated. Clayton had mentioned the idea to her earlier that day, suggesting that Emma was old enough to begin proper riding lessons. The request itself was reasonable. Most children in these parts learn to ride early, but accepting meant allowing Clayton deeper into their lives. "We'll see," she said finally. "If you finish all your chores this week without complaining." Emma bounced excitedly on the bed. "I will, I promise." Later, after Emma had fallen asleep, Sarah sat on the porch steps, enjoying the cool evening air. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made her look up. Clayton appeared, leading his horse rather than riding it. "Evening," he said, tipping his hat. "Hope it's not too late for a visit." Sarah smoothed her skirt. "Emma's already asleep." "Actually, I was hoping to talk to you." He tied Rusty to the hitching post and approached the porch. "May I?" She nodded, moving over slightly so he could sit beside her on the step. They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching fireflies blink in the gathering darkness. "I've been thinking about your horse breeding business," Clayton said finally. "Patterson at the livery mentioned you've got a good eye for horseflesh, but you're limited by your stock." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "Been asking about me around town." Clayton had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. "Just taking an interest." "My operation is small," Sarah admitted. "I have 3 good mares and access to the Morgan stud at the Miller place, but I'd like to expand." "There's a horse auction in Helena next month," Clayton said. "Some fine Arabian stock coming in from back east. Could be a good opportunity," Sarah sighed. "Helena's a 3-day ride and I can't leave Emma that long." "Mrs. Jenkins seems fond of her," Clayton suggested. "And I happen to know she's been looking for a reason to try out all those grandmother recipes she's collected. Even if I could arrange care for Emma, I don't have the capital for Arabian stock," Sarah pointed out. Clayton hesitated before continuing. "I've been meaning to tell you. I didn't come back empty-handed. Rangers pay well if you survive long enough, and I wasn't spending much out on the trail." He met her questioning gaze. "I have savings, Sarah, enough to invest in a proper breeding operation." Sarah stiffened. "I'm not looking for charity, Clayton." "Not charity," he corrected quickly. "A business partnership. I know horses too, remember? We could build something together, the ranch we always talked about. The old dream, resurrected from the ashes of their past." Sarah felt a dangerous hope stirring. "A business partnership," she repeated cautiously. "For now," Clayton added softly. "Unless someday you might consider a different kind of partnership." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she kept her expression neutral. "You're getting ahead of yourself, Clayton Reed," he grinned. "Always was my problem, but I mean it about the horses. Think about the auction. It could be a fresh start." As he left that night, Sarah found herself actually considering his proposal. The idea of expanding her horse operation had been a distant dream, one she'd assumed would have to wait until Emma was older. With Clayton's investment, it could become reality sooner. But accepting his help meant accepting his presence in their lives on a more permanent basis. It meant trusting him again. The question that kept her awake long into the night was whether she was ready for either. The decision came unexpectedly the following week. Sarah was exercising one of her mares in the corral when she spotted a group of riders approaching from the north. The sight of them, 5 men, dusty from the trail and hard-faced, sent a chill down her spine. She quickly returned the mare to the stable and hurried to the house, where Emma was playing with her wooden horse on the porch. "Inside, sweetheart," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice casual. "Time for your nap." "But I'm not tired," Emma protested. "Emma," Sarah said more firmly, "inside now." Something in her tone made Emma obey without further argument. Sarah closed the door behind them, moving to the window to watch the approaching riders. They weren't locals. She knew every face within 20 miles of Silverwater. These men had the look of drifters, or worse. When they reached her property line, the lead rider raised his hand, and the group came to a halt. He was a tall man with a shock of gray streaked black hair and a scar that pulled one corner of his mouth into a permanent sneer. "Afternoon, madam," he called out. "Mind if we water our horses at your creek?" Sarah stepped onto the porch, making sure the door was closed behind her. Her shotgun was inside, propped beside the entrance, accessible if needed. "Creek's on the south side of the property," she replied evenly. "Help yourselves, then move along." The man dismounted, his movements slow and deliberate. "Mighty hospitable of you." His eyes roamed over the property, taking in the cabin, the small stable, the corral. "Fine little spread you got here. You manage all this yourself." "My business is my own," Sarah said coolly. "The creek's that way." She pointed southward. The man chuckled, exchanging glances with his companions. "Feisty one, ain't she, boys?" He took a step toward the porch. "Got any coffee brewing inside? Been a long ride." "I'm not running away station," Sarah replied. "There's a town 3 miles east with a hotel if you're looking for refreshments." The man's expression hardened, not very neighborly. Sarah's hand moved slightly toward the door, closer to where the shotgun waited. "I've directed you to water for your horses and given directions to town. That's neighborly enough for strangers." The tension was broken by the sound of approaching hoofbeats. Clayton appeared around the bend in the road, riding hard. He slowed as he neared the property, his expression shifting from concern to wariness as he took in the scene. "Everything all right here, Sarah?" he called, guiding Rusty between her and the strangers. "Just giving these gentlemen directions to town," Sarah replied, relief washing through her. Clayton nodded, his posture relaxed but alert. Sarah noticed his right hand rested casually near his holster. "Creek's good for watering horses," he told the men, "but town's better for people. Harvey runs a clean saloon if you're thirsty." The lead rider studied Clayton carefully, noting the ranger's badge still pinned to his vest, a habit Clayton hadn't abandoned despite no longer being in active service. After a moment, the man nodded. "Much obliged for the directions," he said, mounting his horse. "Boys, let's head to town. Ladies' right, been too long since we had proper refreshments." Sarah didn't relax until the riders had disappeared down the road towards Silverwater. When they were out of sight, she let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "You all right?" Clayton asked, dismounting. Sarah nodded. "How did you know to come?" "I didn't," he admitted. "Was on my way to ask if you'd decided about the Helena auction." Saw those riders heading this way and didn't like the look of them. He frowned. "Recognized the leader, Wade Harmon, has a reputation down in Texas, nothing good." "Well, your timing was perfect," Sarah said softly. "Thank you," Clayton shrugged. "Anyone would have done the same." "But it wasn't anyone," Sarah said. "It was you." Their eyes met, and something shifted between them, a barrier lowering, trust cautiously extended. The moment was interrupted by Emma bursting through the door. "Clay," she exclaimed, using the nickname she'd given him. "Did you bring Rusty?" "Can I pet him?" Clayton laughed, lifting Emma easily. "Sure can, little lady, and I might have a peppermint stick in my saddlebag if your mama says it's all right." Sarah watched them together, Clayton patiently showing Emma how to offer the peppermint to Rusty on a flat palm. The little girl's delighted giggles when the horse's whiskers tickled her hand. Something warm unfurled in her chest, a feeling she'd long forgotten. "I've been thinking about your proposal," she said later, after Emma had returned inside with her treat. "The horse auction in Helena." Clayton's expression brightened. "And, if Mrs. Jenkins is willing to watch Emma, I'd like to go." She held up a hand when he started to speak. "As for your investment offer, I'm willing to discuss terms. A proper business arrangement with everything in writing." "Absolutely," Clayton agreed, barely containing his enthusiasm. "You won't regret this, Sarah." "I hope not," she said quietly. But as she watched him ride away, his posture straight and proud in the saddle, Sarah realized she'd already made a more significant decision than just accepting a business partner. She was opening her heart again, one careful inch at a time. The journey to Helena marked a turning point. 3 days of traveling together, staying at roadside inns in separate rooms, Sarah insisted, and discussing their plans for the breeding operation brought a new dimension to their rekindled relationship. Away from the watchful eyes of Silverwater, Sarah found herself relaxing in Clayton's company, rediscovering the easy conversation and shared humor they'd once enjoyed. "Remember when we used to plan our dream ranch?" Clayton asked as they sat by the campfire on their second night, having chosen to sleep under the stars rather than seek lodging. Sarah nodded, pouring coffee from the battered pot. "You wanted to raise quarter horses. I was determined to have Arabians." "And now we're going to have both," Clayton said, accepting the cup she offered. Their fingers brushed briefly, sending a familiar warmth through Sarah's hand. "If we find good stock at the auction," she cautioned. Clayton leaned back against his saddle. "We will." "I've got a good feeling about this, Sarah." The auction exceeded their expectations. With Clayton's capital and Sarah's expert eye, they secured 2 Arabian mares of excellent bloodlines and a promising young quarter-horse stallion. The investment was substantial, but as they headed back to Silverwater with their new acquisitions, Sarah felt a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. "Emma's going to be so excited," Sarah said as they neared home on the 6th day. "She's been begging for a white horse since she saw an illustration in a book." "That filly's more cream than white," Clayton observed, "but close enough to make a little girl happy." Sarah smiled. "You're good with her, you know. She talks about you constantly." Clayton's expression softened. "She's a special child, smart as a whip just like her mother." The compliment warmed Sarah more than it should have. "Clayton," she began hesitantly, "when we get back, I think, perhaps you should come to dinner. Regularly, I mean. If we're going to be business partners, Emma should get used to having you around." Clayton reined in his horse, turning to look at her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "Is that the only reason?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "You know it isn't." His smile was slow and sweet. "Sunday dinners to start." "Sundays," she agreed, "and we'll see where things go from there." The expansion of Sarah's horse breeding operation transformed her small homestead. With Clayton's help, they constructed additional stables and a larger corral. Word spread quickly about the quality of their stock, drawing buyers from as far as Bozeman and Virginia City. Clayton proved to be as good as his word, remaining a steady presence without pushing for more than Sarah was ready to give. Sunday dinners became a tradition, often extending into evenings spent on the porch, with Emma nestled between them as Clayton told carefully edited stories of his ranger days. Autumn painted the Montana landscape in brilliant hues of gold and crimson. Nearly 4 months had passed since Clayton's return, and Sarah found herself counting the hours between his visits, anticipating his arrival with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. One crisp October afternoon, while Emma was at a friend's birthday celebration in town, Clayton suggested a ride to check on a stretch of fencing along the northern boundary of Sarah's property. "Beautiful day," he commented as they rode side by side, the horses moving at a leisurely pace through tall grass turned golden by the season. Sarah breathed in the clean, sharp air. "I've always loved autumn. Everything changing, preparing for something new." Clayton glanced at her. "Speaking of change, I've been meaning to tell you I bought the old Peterson place." Sarah turned to him in surprise. "The abandoned ranch west of town. Why didn't you say anything?" "Wanted to make sure the deal went through first," Clayton explained. "It needs work, but the house is solid and there's good grazing land." A strange disappointment settled in Sarah's chest. "So you'll be moving out there?" "That depends," Clayton said carefully, reining his horse to a stop. Sarah did the same, turning to face him. "Sarah, I bought it with us in mind. You, me, Emma. The Peterson place has everything we need for a proper horse ranch room to expand, good water access, proximity to the railroad for shipping stock east." Sarah's heart began to race. "Clayton, let me finish," he said gently. "I'm not asking you to make any decisions right now. The property is part of our business partnership if you want it to be, but I'm hoping someday soon it might be more than that." He reached across the space between their horses to take her hand. "I love you, Sarah," never stopped. "I love Emma too, though she's not mine by blood. I want to build a life with both of you." Tears pricked at Sarah's eyes. "You're asking me to marry you, I'm asking you to consider it," Clayton clarified. "When you're ready, if you're ready." Sarah looked down at their joined hands, his large and calloused, her smaller but equally work-roughened. I was so angry with you for so long, she whispered. For leaving, for not writing, for making me wait by that river night after night. I know, Clayton said, his voice thick with regret. I can't change the past, Sarah. All I can do is promise you a future. She raised her eyes to his. Emma needs stability. She's had enough change in her young life. I understand that, Clayton assured her. I'm not going anywhere with or without your answer. The only difference is whether I'll be watching the sunrise from the Peterson place or from a cabin with you and Emma beside me. The sincerity in his eyes was her undoing. 5 months ago, she would have laughed at the idea of trusting Clayton Reed again. Now she couldn't imagine her life without him in it. Yes, she said simply. Clayton blinked. Yes, a smile spread across Sarah's face, unfettered and joyful. Yes, I'll marry you, Clayton Reed. Yes, we'll make the Peterson place our home. Yes to the future you're offering us. Clayton was off his horse in an instant, reaching up to lift Sarah from her saddle. Her laughter rang out across the meadow as he spun her around, then set her gently on her feet. You won't regret this, he promised, framing her face with his hands. I better not, she teased, but her eyes were soft with emotion. When he kissed her, it was like coming home after a long journey, familiar yet new, the fulfillment of a promise made long ago by a river that had witnessed both their beginning and their renewal. They were married on a bright November day in Silverwater's small church. Emma served as flower girl, solemnly scattering rose petals down the aisle before running to stand beside Clayton at the altar, her hand trustingly in his. Sarah wore a simple ivory dress with wildflowers in her hair, Clayton's special request that had brought tears to her eyes when he'd shyly suggested it. You look just like you did that summer by the river, he whispered as she joined him before the preacher. Only more beautiful, if that's possible. The Peterson place became the Reed Ranch, transformed through hard work and shared vision into one of the finest horse breeding operations in the territory. The following spring brought the birth of their first foals from the new stock and the news that Emma would have a sibling by Christmas. Clayton's joy at the prospect of fatherhood was boundless. He spent hours preparing a nursery in their spacious farmhouse, crafting a cradle from pine with his own hands. Emma, delighted by the idea of becoming a big sister, appointed herself official helper, following Clayton everywhere with tiny tools he'd made especially for her. Do you think the baby will like horses? She asked one evening as Sarah tucked her into bed. Sarah smiled, smoothing Emma's golden curls. I'm sure of it. How could any child of this family not love horses? Clay says I can help teach the baby to ride when it's big enough, Emma declared proudly. Did he now? Sarah raised an eyebrow, glancing at Clayton, who stood in the doorway watching them with undisguised adoration. We'll see about that. The baby will need to be at least 3 before any riding lessons. That's what I told her, Clayton confirmed, coming to sit on the edge of the bed. No rushing these things. Emma yawned, her eyelids growing heavy. Will you tell me a story, Clay, the one about the wild Mustang? Of course, little lady. Clayton settled more comfortably on the bed as Sarah rose to give him room. Once upon a time, there was a magnificent black Mustang that roamed the plains, free as the wind. Sarah stood in the doorway, one hand resting on her slightly rounded belly, watching the man she loved weave tales for the daughter who had captured his heart as surely as her mother had. The journey that had brought them to this moment had been long and sometimes painful, but standing here now, Sarah wouldn't have changed a single step. Later that night, as they sat on the porch swing watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness, Clayton pulled Sarah close against his side. Happy? He asked, his hand splayed protectively over her stomach. Sarah nodded, leaning her head against his shoulder. Completely, more than I ever thought possible. He pressed a kiss to her temple. You know, sometimes I still can't believe you gave me a second chance after everything. Neither can I, Sarah admitted with a soft laugh. But then I remember something my mother used to say, that true love doesn't always take the straightest path, but it finds its way home eventually. Clayton's arms tightened around her. Home, he repeated. That's what you are to me, Sarah. You and Emma and this little one on the way. My home. As darkness settled fully over the Montana landscape, Sarah thought about the twists and turns that had brought them to this moment, the young girl who had waited by the river, the woman who had built a life without him, and now the wife and mother who had found her way back to love. Different versions of herself, all part of the journey that had led her home. The December night their son was born was the coldest in living memory. Snow piled in drifts against the farmhouse walls, and the wind howled like a living thing across the frozen plains. Clayton had been forced to fetch the doctor himself, riding through the blizzard with grim determination while Mrs. Jenkins stayed with Sarah and a frightened Emma. "You have a beautiful boy," Dr. Wilson announced hours later, placing the swaddled infant in Clayton's trembling arms. "Strong lungs on that one." Clayton stared down at his son in wonder. 10 perfect fingers, a shock of dark hair, and when the tiny eyes blinked open, they were the same hazel as Sarah's. "He's perfect," he whispered. "Clay," Sarah's tired voice called from the bedroom. "Is he all right?" Clayton carried their son to her side, gently transferring the bundle to her waiting arms. "He's more than all right," he assured her, sitting beside her on the bed. "He's amazing, just like his mother." Sarah's exhausted face glowed with happiness as she counted tiny fingers and toes. "Hello, little one," she murmured. "We've been waiting for you." Emma, who had been keeping a solemn vigil in the corner chair, approached cautiously. "Can I see my brother now?" Clayton lifted her onto the bed, positioning her carefully beside Sarah. "Emma, meet Charles Thomas Reed." "Charlie," Emma said decisively, peering at the red-faced infant. "He looks like a Charlie." Sarah and Clayton exchanged amused glances. "Charlie it is then," Sarah agreed. As dawn broke over the snow-covered landscape, painting the white world in shades of pink and gold, the Reed family welcomed the new day together. Sarah propped against pillows with Charlie nursing at her breast, Emma curled against her side, and Clayton watching over them all with fierce protectiveness. "Thank you," he said softly when Emma had drifted off to sleep and Charlie was contentedly milk-drunk. Sarah looked up, her eyes questioning. "For what?" "For this," Clayton said simply, gesturing to encompass their children, their home, the life they'd built together. "For waiting by that river all those years ago. For being strong enough to build a life without me. For being brave enough to let me back in." Sarah reached for his hand, twining their fingers together. "I think I was waiting for you even when I didn't know it," she admitted. "Even when I was angry and hurt and determined to forget you, some part of me knew you'd find your way back." Clayton brought her hand to his lips. "I always will," he promised. "No matter what happens, I will always find my way back to you, Sarah Reed." As winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer, the Reed ranch flourished. Charlie grew from a helpless infant to a determined toddler with his father's smile and his mother's thoughtful eyes. Emma, now 9, became his devoted protector and self-appointed teacher, proudly showing him how to feed the chickens and pet the gentler horses under careful supervision. 5 years to the day after Clayton had ridden back into Sarah's life, they took the children on a picnic to Silver Creek. The cottonwood trees were in full leaf, casting dappled shadows over the grassy bank where they spread their blanket. Emma immediately led Charlie to the shallow edge of the creek, showing him how to skip stones across the surface. Clayton and Sarah watched them from the blanket, his arm around her shoulders, her head resting in the familiar hollow of his neck. "They're growing so fast," Sarah observed, smiling as Charlie's delighted laughter rang out when one of his stones actually skipped once before sinking. "Too fast," Clayton agreed. "Soon Emma will be wanting to court and I'll have to start cleaning my rifle on the porch," Sarah laughed. "You have a few years yet before you need to worry about that." She turned in his embrace to face him. "Are you happy, Clayton, with this life we've built?" His expression grew serious. "Happier than I ever dreamed possible. Why do you ask?" Sarah shrugged. "Sometimes I wonder if you miss the excitement of your ranger days. If this," she gestured to their picnic, their children, "the peaceful scene, is enough after all you've seen and done." Clayton cupped her cheek in his palm. "Sarah Reed, there is more excitement, adventure, and joy in one day with you and our children than in all my years riding with the Rangers. This is everything, don't you see? This is what I was fighting for even when I didn't know it." He kissed her then, tender and sweet, until Emma's disgusted "Mama, Papa" made them break apart laughing. Later, as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Clayton took Sarah's hand and led her a short distance away from where the children were building a dam of pebbles in the shallow part of the creek. "I have something for you," he said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a slender gold chain with a small pendant, a delicately crafted gold wildflower with a tiny pearl at its center. Sarah's breath caught. "Clayton, it's beautiful." "I had it made in Helena," he explained, fastening it around her neck. The pendant nestled in the hollow of her throat, catching the late afternoon sunlight. A reminder of the girl who once waded by this river with wildflowers in her hair. Sarah touched the pendant gently. "She seems so young now, that girl." "She was," Clayton agreed. "We both were. But I see her still, you know." His eyes held hers, filled with the same wonder and love that had captured her heart all those years ago. "Every day, when you're teaching Emma to bake, or showing Charlie how to brush the horses, or keeping our accounts with that little furrow of concentration between your brows, I see glimpses of the girl I fell in love with. And I fall in love all over again with the woman she's become." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, happy ones. "I never thought I could be this happy again after you left," she confessed. "I was so determined to be strong, to need no one. And you are strong," Clayton assured her. "The strongest person I know. Strong enough to forgive, to trust again, to build this life with me." From downstream, Charlie's excited squeal drew their attention. "Look, Mama, Emma and me caught a frog." "Emma and I," Sarah corrected automatically, but she was smiling as she called back. "That's wonderful, sweetheart, but remember to let him go afterward." As they rejoined their children by the creek, Sarah felt a sense of completion that transcended mere happiness. This was where she belonged, where they all belonged. The path that had brought them here had been winding and sometimes painful, but every step had led to this moment, this family, this love. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the grassy banks of Silver Creek. Soon they would pack up their picnic and head home to the ranch, to the life they had built together. But for now, Sarah savored the moment, her daughter's confident instructions as she showed Charlie how to hold the frog gently. Her son's wide-eyed wonder at the creature in his small hands, and beside her, Clayton's steady presence, as constant and true as the Montana sky above them. She had once been a girl who waited by the river, dreaming of a future with the boy she loved. Now she was a woman who had found her way back to that love, stronger for the journey and grateful for every step that had brought her home. As if reading her thoughts, Clayton's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining with the easy familiarity of hearts that had found their perfect match. And in that simple touch was everything Sarah had ever wanted: belonging, family, and a love that had weathered separation and time to emerge more profound than either of them could have imagined in their youth. The river flowed on, witness to their story past, present, and the promise of all the tomorrows that awaited the family who had found their way home to each other, beside the waters that had seen it all begin.